Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Yacach. Come, let us reason together. Um, Here again with Minister Joel. Still talking about the contagious church, I guess.
Yep.
So, over to you, Minister Joel.
Right. So, thanks again for having me, Reverend. The last time was a good time. We just began to scratch the surface of, this wonderful book, The Contagious Church. If you've not grabbed a copy, please do grab a copy because it will change your life and your ministry. I think this today's episode, I want us to, our team maybe is dedicated to the pastors and ministers out there, reverends, in churches, because I want to ask questions from like my point of view, because there are some practical things I've been thinking about, when I've been going through the contagious church, and I've been asking myself how, what am I supposed to do, the details.
Okay.
So I want us to get into those. And it starts from chapter 2. In chapter 2, you talk about principles that made the early church contagious.
Okay.
And you've mentioned a lot of times in your sermons that principles are, principles whether you like them or not. If you do them, they will work for you. It is not based on how you feel. It is not based on what you think. Right? And two of the principles you mentioned in chapter 2 really intrigued me. Of course, all the principles there, from prayer to the word, important, but these two intrigue me because, I don't find them common in a lot of churches. And the one thing I've realized is in struggling churches, they are almost non-existent. And when people think about church, they don't think about some of these things. So you mentioned that the principle of developing a well-defined welfare system.
Okay.
Right. So the question I have with this is, how would this look practically? What is a welfare system for maybe those who don't know, and what are some of the steps you can take to, how does it look like?
Okay. So, like I said, I based the whole book on Acts chapter 2 from verse 42 downwards. And the principle of the welfare system is defined in those few verses where there was no one who had need, because everyone who had need had their needs met by the church, because those who had wealth, land, sold them and brought the monies to the pot that was used to cater for the needs of everyone. So there was a well-developed welfare system for everybody. And you see, they say that, don't tell me you love me, show me you love me by what you do. So it's like we can preach till the cows come home about the love of Jesus, but if you don't demonstrate it, the world would not really take us seriously. And we don't have to be the richest church. We don't have to have so much in excess before we begin to have the principle of, catering for those who are less privileged than us. We can share the little we have with others, and that, you see, when you give to somebody out of your heart, it tells the person what your heart is, who you are, and what is in your heart. And that is for me, is love being demonstrated practically. So every church that does not cater for the poor is not really a church that is going to be attractive to the people. Remember, Jesus said that the gospel is for the poor. In Luke chapter 4 verse 8, is that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. So the gospel really is for the poor. And one of the ways we preach the gospel is to practically demonstrate the love of God, which is through catering for their needs.
Okay. So, that will primarily be communicated to maybe those outside the church. But what about welfare? So maybe I'm a pastor of a church. How can I develop a system that, just like you said in Acts chapter 2, they sort of took care of themselves? Because sometimes it's like there are people who can solve certain problems for others, but that connection is not there. So how does a pastor of the church sort of develop a system that makes sure that there's not a single need in the church that is met? What are some of the things they can be?
Okay, so one of the difficulties that pastors have is you don't want to encourage laziness. So you don't want to develop like a communist type of system where people are fed whether they work or not, But you want to make a point where when the need arises, you are there to support. Like the Bible says in Matthew 25 that I was in prison and he came to visit. I was in need of clothes. I was, cold and you brought me clothes. And Jesus would say, the master would say, where did we see you naked? Where did you see you in prison and came to visit? And said, as you did it for those, my brothers, you did it for me. So I believe that every church must have that thing there where when need arises, the church will jump in to help. So the welfare, it's a practice, and the church doesn't have to be the richest to do that. It has to. It's part of our mandate as a church.
I think this kind of relates to, I know there's a whole chapter you dedicate to the contagious Christian, because of course to have a contagious church, it must be full of contagious Christians, and I believe the generosity is part of the traits of a contagious Christian. Does this mean that this idea of welfare should be traced to the pulpit? Like, should messages come from the pulpit pushing this mindset forward?
Yes, I believe so. But you see, the problem we have is abuse. The problem we have is that it also makes people lazy. The Bible is balanced because the Bible says the hands that don't work must not eat. So we are not saying that you must not work and just sponge off others. That's no. I don't believe that's welfare. Yeah. Do you get it? It's rather welfare is when there's a need. When the need arises, we cater or we come together to solve the need. But other than that, go get a job.
Yeah. Yes, that's interesting. I think it even touches on the fact that when we talk about need, it cannot be limited to just poor people. There are some rich people that have certain peculiar needs. Everybody has a need. So I believe it covers every type of every member's needs, because maybe this rich member is just looking for a connection that someone who is not necessarily even as rich might have that contact and that introduction.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Thank you very much. I mean, in the short period of my life that I have, been a minister or been in ministry, I have seen how difficult it is to disciple or for discipleship. Discipleship is not easy. It's easy to actually just get somebody into church from evangelism or invite people, but then to stay with them and disciple them. And it's one of the principles that you mentioned that made the early church contagious. You said that, from the time a soul is won, a detailed plan for a well-developed system of discipleship must be in place for the person. If the organization is serious about becoming contagious, and you went on to say you are not talking about just a 2 or 3 page document introducing the church to first-time guests, but rather a mentoring program to train members at every stage of development. My question is, how will this mentoring program look like practically? How can one be developed? Can you walk us through from your experience?
When the Great Commission was given by Jesus, I go into the world and make disciples of me. A disciple is a follower. And when they get to a place, this disciple is now become an apostle. Do you get it? Yeah. So my role is to disciple the person till they become an apostle. So it's not like till they start speaking in tongues or join the ministry. No. It's like it's an ongoing thing till they become fully matured. They become like me. When I say like me, until they get to the point where I am, my job is not done. Do you get it? So it's a learning. It should be a program where I am making disciples of me. I'm replicating myself. But if I'm a pastor, then until I get to the point where I am also developing pastors, then I haven't achieved my point. Does that mean that everybody that comes to my church must become a pastor? No, that is not what it means. But then it means that everybody must develop and be matured till they get to their calling, the place of calling, their place of purpose.
So, in the churches that you have pastored over the years, what are some of the things you've done with regards to like a discipleship program? What are some of the things you've put in place?
So I have like a mentoring program that I've developed, which, like by the grace of God, I've had many pastors pass through my ministry, and some of them I still pastor till this day. Some of them, I pastor from afar, but they are still, because I was pastored, I was mentored, I was, coached. And so I feel that is what was modeled to me is what I model. The way I was pastored, I was brought up is the way I hopefully bring up those who are within my domain, So it's a continuous learning experience, a continuous practical experience. So if you stay close, it's only a matter of time.
I mean, from my personal experience as a minister under your leadership, I mean, I've seen you have these frequent trainings with us, on a monthly or even bi-weekly basis. And the amount of effort you put into, different multiple trainings for different parts of the church and the camps that we organize, right? This looks like a very daunting task. Like, it requires a lot of time, effort, sacrifice to disciple people. So is it safe to say that if you are not willing to put in that amount of time and effort, you can't have a contagious church?
I wouldn't say that, but I mean, for me, I'm not going to be around always. Do you get it? So, if I can leave a legacy, if I can leave, replicate myself in multiple people, then I believe that my calling has been achieved. Do you get it? So it's not a matter of it. Like you said, it's daunting. It's a lot of sacrifice, a lot of work that you need to put in to do, but I believe it's worth it, because the greatest investment anyone can make is in people, not in buildings, not in structures. It's in people. So if you can build Christ in people, if you can build, people's relationship with God up for them, then you have done your job as a minister.
Awesome. Final question around discipleship. I mentioned camps earlier, and I personally have seen how effective and very important having camps as a church is. But I want you to just touch on that for maybe a new pastor of a church. How critical and important is it for that a church to have and organize camps?
Right.
And how often should they?
So you look at it this way. If I stay in the church, I preach 45 minutes every Sunday. Practically speaking, for the next 52 weeks, I would have done 52 weeks plus times 45 minutes, give or take. You're talking about how many hours is that?
So, I mean, even if we stretch it to an hour, that's just like 52 hours.
It's 52 hours.
But
let's say an hour is
52
hours.
A year.
A year. I go to camp and I'm preaching, let's be conservative and say that I'm preaching 8 hours a day for a week, which is I mean, you know, our camp is minimum
than,
10 to 12
12
hours.
yeah,
So you just imagine if I'm doing 10 hours
for 5 days.
for 5 days.
That's 50 hours already.
So in a week, I've achieved what someone would do in a year. And remember, it's because we are not distracted, we are secluded from every. I have the attention of people, a year's worth of attention in a week. So you can imagine how much I can feed, how much I can deposit in the lives of the people, as to a year of coming in. You can't guarantee that people are going to be consistent Sunday in, Sunday out for the whole year to get that 52 hours. Do you get it? Yeah. But then if I get them in a camp for 5 days and I deposit 52 hours of in them, that is something that for me is a very good enough investment. So for us in our church, we spend a lot of money because we do the camps at a very discounted rate, so that as far as I'm concerned, if we have to bear even all the costs, the total cost to deposit into people, that's a good investment.
It's good you mentioned the money bit, because I was just thinking about, a young pastor has, maybe 30 members, and 90 or 80% of them are students. How can they, in what practical ways can they start to have camps?
I think our first camp, we were about 15 people or 10 to 15 people, and it was practically free of charge. We paid for it, the church paid for it, and we took about 15 people. I think our cameraman is one of those people who were at that camp. And I the difference between somebody who has been to camps and somebody who hasn't is obvious.
So this is worth the
investment. It's worth the investment. So I don't care how small the church is or how big the church is. It's something. When a church becomes too large, you can't have the whole church go for a camp. But you can have it's segmented. You take a group of people to a camp 2-3 days. Take another group of people 2-3 days. It's worth the investment. Believe me.
I think I also even remember the year that you actually took us to the Contagious Church camp, and that was actually within the pandemic. And you would think that a lot of churches shut down during the pandemic, and you would think that we can't have a camp in this period, but we still managed to have a camp, and it was a day camp. So it seems like by hook or by crook, it's one of the things that a church needs to.
I believe so. A pastor, a servant of God must never ever. You must never abdicate your job, your duty to feed the because what makes you in Jeremiah 3:15 is, I'll give pastors according to my heart, will feed you with knowledge and understanding. Your duty is to feed, so you cannot not feed the sheep. The sheep must eat, otherwise they die. So whatever price it takes to feed, you must sacrifice to do that job.
Great. The last episode, you talked about culture change, and I think that's the last question I'll ask for today. You talked about the fact that culture needs to change, and you list quite a number of bad cultures in this book. And that can be replaced by good ones. And I'm particularly, interested in the culture of people forming cliques in church and making other people coming in not feel welcome. How destructive is it to a church, when such a culture exists, and how can it be broken?
There's, in economics, there's something called barriers of entry. So some companies form monopolies, and or oligopolies, and they block others from entering that market. And that is how cliques look like in churches. A church exists to absorb people into the kingdom of God. So it's like you're going against you're going opposite to what the church stands for. When you close ranks, do you understand? You make it so solid that nobody can enter. It defeats the purpose of a church. So it's a culture that easily builds itself up. Human beings, as we are, we gravitate towards the people we flow with.
Yeah.
And once we form that circle, we don't want anybody else to come in to disturb the equilibrium that we have. So it's something that you must be conscious of. It's something you must talk against it. It's something that you must always be mindful. Remind people that this is not what the church is about. The church is supposed to be an open, forum for people to be able to come in and feel welcome and feel part, a sense of belonging. It's a family that welcomes any and everybody into.
I think what you're saying is really true. Even people, the way people describe their churches, I know it's personally is one of the things you've been against. This is not a white church, black church, Hispanic church, because the picture in Revelations is all nations,
Yes.
everybody, all around the world. So it's very, very interesting that you are talking about it and you go into depth in this book. Before we close, are there any final words you have for the readers of the Contiguous Church and also for those who are yet to read this?
I think that any serious minister, any serious Christian, any serious person who really wants to see the Church of God established and do well must have a book like this and read it. And the way I wrote the book, I wrote it in such a way that you can pick just one chapter, and it stands on its own. One chapter in the book stands on its own. So you don't have to read from cover to cover. You can take any chapter, and it takes about less than 5 minutes to read a chapter. So you can take one chapter and then read it, and it stands on its own. So you can go through the table of content and decide what you want to zero in and just read on that, and it stands on its own. So you don't have to spend, maybe I'm going to take like 3-4 hours to read the whole book. No, you can just read a chapter a day or something. So I've made it so practical that one chapter is just 5-10 minutes, you're done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Reverend. This has been a pleasure and an honor. Yes, as I said the last time when I messaged you, I am still looking forward to seeing all the things you've mentioned here implemented in my church. God bless you.
God bless you too. And thank you for coming. The books can be found in chrisandoh.org and in Amazon. You can buy the Kindle version. You can get the book as well on Amazon. You can get it on chrisandoh.org and anywhere good books are sold. So get a copy and be blessed. So until we come your way again next week, this has been your host, Pastor Chris. Shalom, peace. God bless.